Good afternoon. On behalf of Aviation Skillnet, I would like to welcome you to the third in our series of aviation updates. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Ulick McEvaddy, who will talk through the current situation from a global perspective. Ulick will be looking at the geopolitical forces, the rise of China and India, Asian Pacific, the next steps towards a carbon neutral future. I hope you all enjoyed the session, and I will now hand you over to Clodagh.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I just noticed that people are coming online and they're attending. So if we just give them one more minute as people are arriving into the room, you're very welcome this afternoon. By way of introduction to Ulick, Ulick is the chairman at Omega Air Refuelling Services. Ulick is a former Irish Army officer and his ties to the military continue to this day as Omega is the commercial supplier for the US Navy and the Marine Corps air-to-air refueling capability. Omega Air also provides services for US military allies, including the Royal Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the Finnish Air Force. Ulick has been involved in high-profile national projects such as the proposed expansion of Dublin Airport. The ground rules for today, Ulick will present on the topics introduced by Linda for about 40 to 45 minutes, and we will take questions during the presentation. We encourage you to submit questions or comments using the Q&A function. If we encounter problems with broadband, please bear with us as we may need to pause the camera. Today's session is being recorded, and just now I will pass you over to Ulick and we will get started.
Good afternoon, everybody. You must have very little to do if you want to listen to me for 45 minutes, but anyway, we'll do our best to be entertaining and informative. Okay, when Claude asked me to do this in order, they said, what do you want to talk about? It's really the future of aviation today after a disastrous pandemic that has hit the world is, well, it's very much in doubt. Without 170 billion being pumped in by the various governments into this particular aviation industry, I doubt that we would have a future. Once the pandemic is over, I think vaccinations and the speed at which they've been rolled out is probably essential for the aviation industry to return back to normal. I do expect that you will not be allowed to book a ticket without a vaccination in the months to come. Once everybody can be vaccinated, the airlines will probably say, we need a vaccination certificate. How that's going to look, the European Union has said they'll have something on the table by June. The sooner the better, because I think it'll be vital for the industry that vaccinations and proven vaccinations are available to all potential travelers. Also for international travel, you will find that countries will demand a vaccination certificate before you can enter any jurisdiction. And I think that'll certainly happen here, though the government has not said so yet. They're looking for PCR tests as a proof that you haven't got COVID and quarantine. Quarantine is a mess, and I think Michael O'Leary is right in that respect. It will be deterrent to international travel in the short term. Also be a deterrent to people wanting to go anywhere if they know they have to spend X number of days in quarantine, whether it's 10 or 5 or 8. It certainly take the steam off your holiday if you have to spend 5 of those days stuck in a hotel. So I think their solution is get vaccinated, get certificates on the table, so that the airlines can travel again with ease. Restoring the airline industry to its previous good health will be tough. There will be a pent-up demand for sure, and that is one of the hopes that the industry has, that the pent-up demand will lead to more and more people wanting to travel, not having been able to do so for the last 12, 14 months. So yes, that will be one of the hopeful things coming into the future for the aviation industry. So if we go from COVID then to look at the geopolitical issues that are affecting the industry, the United States has probably the largest aviation industry in the world right now, closely followed by the Asia Pacific region. And Asia Pacific has been badly affected by, again, the COVID pandemic. China is returning to near normal. They have vaccines. The Sinopharm vaccine seems to be effective. They're also taking a very serious lockdown measure that most democracies probably couldn't do, but the Chinese are doing very well as regards containing the virus within their own jurisdiction. As regards the rest of the Asia Pacific region, Japan has had an upsurge just when the Olympics were looking hopeful for them, and that has been disastrous for them. The vaccination in Japan is something that hasn't been as successful as in others, and I think that's something they're going to pay attention to right now if they want, particularly if they want the Olympics to run. My own view on that, it's in doubt that the Olympics will run at anything like the schedule they had. There will be probably a revised schedule that will bring it back into a different perspective, and there'll be no large audiences for the athletes to. Anyway, that's my view on the whole Asia Pacific region coming back. Yes, it will come back and rebound quickly, I think, in the third quarter of this year. The United States is already rebounding, as is China. One of the disasters, I suppose, of this pandemic has been that the HNA, which is the large conglomerate that owns Hainan Airlines in China, has been put into bankruptcy. Now, it's majority owned by Hainan province, so they would be the biggest sufferers if there is a deficit when the bankruptcy is wound up. Some of my more informed colleagues say that there will be very little deficit because the various things they have as entities in their own right are pretty successful and should sell very well if it's a breakup of HNA that is required by the bankruptcy. The other problem China has is that their infrastructure is good. But for example, Hainan Airways have 220 aircraft, so they have the aircraft infrastructure, but they have also to increase their airport availability in the outlying areas away from the major cities. That's working, but it's taking some years for that to come to fruition, and it will be further into the future. They also have the worry, if you like, of the unrest in the region. There's serious unrest as regards the South China Sea. We have seen the United States say they will not accept any right of China to block the freedom of navigation either in the air or the sea in the South China Sea and the territories of the 8 dash lines that China have long claimed as their territory. Of course, this was rejected by the International Court in The Hague some years ago, but China have refused to accept the result. It's disquieting, yes. Could it accidentally cause war? Well, we hope not. I mean, Chinese have to trust that the West has no ill intentions towards them, and that's a deficit right now that they don't have that trust. However, with the new administration in the United States, I mean, Antony Blinken is an experienced civil servant, has run that department before. He has, he knows his business. He's not going to provoke a war in any shape or form if he can avoid it. Neither is Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor to President Biden. Indeed, the whole Biden camp are experienced hands, and I expect they shall not make mistakes of that nature. Could China make a mistake? Yes. Could they fire on a US vessel? Well, I doubt they will do that. If they do, I wouldn't be able to predict the result. So I would hope that the Chinese will treat the American position and the world position, if you like. India has a stake in this, Australia, Japan, Vietnam, all of these countries would be affected by any effort by China to control or produce hegemony of the South China Sea as a political issue. So I think if we look to the future, that they will begin to trust the West and find that we're not aggressively after their intent, but we will not be pushed either by Chinese intent. Building up trust with China is probably going to be Tony Blinken's biggest challenge. The first meeting they had didn't go very well in Alaska. I would think that there was probably a test meeting to see where each side stood, and it certainly didn't engender much trust going forward. But I'm hoping that the Biden administration will be able to repair that in the short term and put the Chinese at ease as to the intent of the Western world, not just America, but the whole of the West, including European Union, Australia, Japan, India, which is a major power player in the region. And they particularly will be affected by any action. So they will certainly not be one to see. They have had some skirmishes on their borders. luckily it has cooled down. I think the Prime Minister Modi has had conversations with Chinese leadership and said, let's not go this route, guys, because we're both nuclear powered nations. A deterrent in itself. A nuclear weapon, while it's not foolproof, but it's the mutual assured destruction aspect of it that will particularly make it a potent weapon, if you like, to stop war. However, nobody can predict what happened in the Middle East in recent times. Another area of turbulence, when you see Qatar and Saudi Arabia at loggerheads over things, you say, well, what's going on here? Now, they're both Sunni powers. Turkey, you see, moving into the Russian ambit. Not a good place for them to be going because they've been a NATO ally for over 50 years. But Erdogan essentially is very much a dictator now. He's total control of the Turkish government. And he will certainly be a force to be reckoned with in the future. And I'm worried about his pivot towards Russia. He's bought the S-400 missile system from Russia, which is a very potent missile system. It flies Mach Power 14 and has a range of 35 kilometers, 250 kilometers, sorry. So anything we have in the air is vulnerable to the S-400 missile. They have batteries, the Russians have batteries of S-400 in Latakia, but my friends in the intelligence community said they've never switched on the radar in that region. They don't want to paint any aircraft with the missile. So I think it's, I'm not worried about Putin going to war. He doesn't want war any more than anything else. But Ukraine is his big bugbear. He's taken Crimea. He's taken a good chunk of the Donbass area of Ukraine. Could he pivot there? Yes. That's a worry. And will he be challenged by the West? Yes. There's no doubt in my mind that if he goes to take the entire Ukrainian peninsula, he will be challenged by NATO and the allies. So these are all, if you like, issues that might concern the aviation industry, but hopefully none will come to pass. I mean, you saw last night Tel Aviv airport had to be closed because of the Gaza Strip firing rockets into the Tel Aviv region. So the unpredictability is probably the most concerning aspect for the future of aviation. So if you look at the growth scenario in the Middle East aviation market, it's US dollars about 15 billion the market is worth. It's forecast to grow by about 6%. Now that's despite the pandemic. It was to be about 8% prior to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, I think they've reduced the growth rate to about 6%. Substantial. All the great airports in the region, you have Qatar, you have Dubai, you have Abu Dhabi, and they're all in a small circle of hub in that Middle East region. But they have a very strategic reach. They reach Australia. You have, most people going from Europe now will be familiar with the Dubai, Abu Dhabi axis for Australia and indeed Qatar as well. So a huge market opened up by essentially by Sheikh Maktoum, who was the architect of the Dubai adventure when he built that airport. He said, build the airport and the passengers would come. He was right. Extraordinary how the whole thing turned out. Now, compared to 2018-19, the pre-pandemic growth was being astonishing. I mean, it was up on 7.5% on an annual basis. 6% is probably high for the next 12 months, but it could very well reach that if the vaccines roll out. Okay. The wealth of the Middle East is extraordinary. They have all that oil wealth. So as a result of that, they have the luxury of investing in carriers. For example, Etihad, Emirates, Qatar. They're airlines fueled by the oil scenario. As we go towards carbon neutral, I expect their oils will no longer be the great panacea they were for their wealth in the future, but they will find other things to do with their oil, I'm sure. Also, the future of oil may be helped by efforts underway in the United States, in particular for carbon capture. The Texas Panhandle and Houston in particular have developed technologies for carbon capture. Nobody has any idea how much those technologies are costing yet, and they certainly won't be cheap, but they're available. So how's the future look for the Middle East? Saudi Arabia is handicapped by a number of issues. One is that the major carrier, Saudia, does not allow alcohol on board. That, by the way, that has a serious impediment to its growth, because a lot of people say, if I can't have a glass of wine on the airplane, I'm nervous enough flying, I want a glass of wine, but they're not going. And I don't see that being changed, even with MBS in the short term. Qatar, Dubai, Emirates and Etihad, they all have alcohol availability on board, and their passenger numbers grow, particularly between the Far East and the Middle East and Australia. I would think the future is rosy for them. They have, the investment is already made in infrastructure and aircraft. So if they can keep doing what they're doing and increasing their passenger loads, yes, they have a good future. So let's move again back to the Far East. We've given an overview of what I think of the Far East, but if you look at what the Far East is doing in terms of, it has the highest growth rate in the world for the last 10 years in the aviation industry. When I say the Far East, I mean Australia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and China. So all of that area has had a huge growth rate over the last 10 years, last decade. I would think it continues to grow. Singapore Airlines continue to grow. Their growth rate has been, the pandemic has stunted it, but they tend to grow at a rate of 6 to 7% per annum. Don't see that changing in the short term, except for this interruption with the pandemic. So I would expect 2022 back to growth again. Now, as regards the regulatory burden, particularly for the Western world, where we tend to look at the growth of carbon emissions as a huge, and it's causing global fears across the globe for climate change, not to be something that we can actually put a finger on and say, well, it's only going to be so much effect. It is. It's going to affect everybody, and everybody traveling. The price to the traveling public will go up because we have to take measures to reduce our carbon emissions. Some hopeful things going on in the world. I mean, the green economy is going to help. Carbon capture in particular, if it's affordable, will be a good one. Even affects the farmers in all regions where they have to try and reduce the methane emissions of cattle, which is a very difficult thing to do. But I see in Texas now where they're actually going to house the cattle for so many hours a day to reduce the carbon emissions, and they're going to try and capture the methane because it rises to the upper ends of the buyers, and they're going to have some methane collection system incorporated to reduce emissions from cattle. So all of these things are interrelated. Another hopeful sign is carbon capture is being used for fuel to create carbon neutral jet fuel by a company called Zeus in California. That has huge prospects, huge challenges too, to get the volumes and to get the cost down to recognizable levels where it's not going to increase the price of gas from $3.50 to $7 a gallon. That may very well be the only way out of climate change, is that the price will increase per gallon of fuel because of the fact that we got to do it, and we got to fly, and we got to reduce climate change at the same time. New technology engines, yes, great, and they're doing great for reducing carbon, but it won't be carbon neutral. Reducing carbon by 10, 15% is not enough. It has to be reduced by substantially more. I'd encourage you to look at the website for Zeus to see what they're doing, because it is actually an interesting technology that has been rolled out there. How far is it away from being a useful technology for the airline industry? Probably 7 to 10 years, but no more. They say 7 to 10 years. So I expect that'd be about it. Now, is there any, are we at a question session yet?
Yes, Ulick, we are. We'll just take a break here for the moment. So I'd like to invite the participants, maybe on the first piece, Ulick, with regards to the global economy, the stability of that, the different marketplaces, from the US, Australia, Qatar, the Middle East. Yes, we have a raised hand. Is there a question there? If you submit your questions either on the chat or the Q&A function. I don't have that question just yet.
It's all right.
Wait till I see. In the context of Omega Air, Ulick, and planning for that fragility and uncertainty sometimes in the different markets, how, as a business, how can you mitigate and plan for really the unknown in part? How does that happen in Omega Air?
Well, we have split our business in two sections. We have our military side of the house, and that's an important and growing sector. As regards the leasing business, we have been much reduced in that in recent years. The reason being is that when the older venture capital funds came loading into it, the margins were reduced, and the margins were very important for it. Let me go back and explain. When Dr. Ryan, who was the father of this leasing industry, started the business, it was just seasonal leasing. He used to lease the Aer Lingus surplus aircraft to Caribbean nations and what in the wintertime when Aer Lingus travel was low. But as the GPA increased and the ILFC, the large American corporation out of California, they were the two giants of the leasing industry. Then GE Capital bought GPA, and ILFC was bought by GE Capital as well. They're all looking bad. So you can see then that the remnants of the GPA has grown in Ireland, and AirCap now have just bought the GE portfolio of aircraft, making them the largest leasing company in the world based in Ireland. But the margins are so razor thin that the small guys can't compete. It's by volume. So they have 600-700 airplanes, volume is there. If one or two leases go wrong, well, they can absorb that, but the margins are very tight. So the industry itself the leasing industry will no doubt have the knock-on effect from the airlines not being able to pay their bills. How it will affect them as regards the long-term prospects, I think they can weather the storm. They're big enough to do so. Some smaller guys will not be able to do so, but the big guys will. And as a result, I think they will come forward reasonably well into the future.
Thanks, Ulick. Thank you. A few questions coming in there now, Ulick. What country has been worst affected with what country's aviation has been worst affected by the pandemic?
Well, I think Brazil. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Ulick.
I think Brazil has been hugely affected by it. I mean, the airlines in Brazil were suffering greatly, and Bolsonaro, the president, he almost did a Trump on it, ignored the fact that COVID existed, and as a result, the pandemic got out of hand. So the people themselves made their own decisions, just didn't get on airplanes. So that has been dramatically affected. The United States has too. There is no country that hasn't been affected, but I think Brazil in particular has been badly affected. India will be now because of the resurgence of COVID in their country, but it's hard to know where it's going to go from here,
Okay, thanks, Ulick. From John Kern, Ulick, does Ulick see business travel declining post-COVID? So how will the business traveller now re-emerge?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the webinars and the Zoom calls and Microsoft Team calls and WebEx calls have changed the way we do business. But I don't think it's going to stay that way long term. I actually believe, I like personally to meet somebody and look them in the eye and do business across a table. So I don't see Microsoft Team in the long term replacing that opportunity. I would think we'll be back to normal when we're all feeling safer for travel.
Okay, thank you, Ulick. In the context of Brexit, so do you see that, Ulick, as a threat to Irish aviation and our position as a transatlantic hub, or do you see that there's an opportunity?
On the contrary, I think it's an opportunity. I think that somebody asked a question about my long-term plans for Dublin Airport, I think it was. But long-term plans for Dublin Airport is to grow the passenger throughput to 80 plus million passengers. At the moment, they're at 34 plus before the COVID pandemic. They're going to need a third terminal in the next 5 to 7 years, and we're ready to build it. Because Dublin can become a European hub, and I'll explain why. It's not the airport congestion is going to be the problem. It's going to be airspace congestion. If you have a heavy coming across the Atlantic that burns 7 to 8 tons an hour, and as it comes down from 35,000 feet to 20,000 feet, the fuel burn grows exponentially. So if you're held for 40 minutes due to congestion of the airspace, you're burning a hell of a lot of gas that you shouldn't need to burn. Dublin is an uncongested airspace on the edge of the Atlantic. So if you look at the supply of small, short-haul carriers out of Dublin, is pretty good. And the short-haul airplanes burning a ton an hour, a hell of a different burn rate from the long-haul transatlantic, trans-Pacific aircraft. So the advantages of Dublin becoming a hub are for the airlines to burn less gas because of the reduced congestion. Now, surely when we go to 80 million passengers, yes, it'll be just as congested as Frankfurt, but we won't have the competing traffic from around the cities of Europe. Europe is blessed that all of the capital cities within an hour and a half flying time, but it does cause for congested airspace, and that's going to be the big problem in the future. We're right now, we reduced from 2,000 feet RBSM down to 1,000 feet. In the short time, I can't see us go down to 500 feet, it's too close. So I think, yes, congestion in the airspace will lead to an advantage for Ireland insofar as we're uncongested airspace, and an advantage for Dublin Airport insofar as the passenger growth will be exponential. Brexit, does that help us? Yes. Because fifth freedom rights are the issue right now for carriers that are not part of the European Union. British Airways have, they bought Aer Lingus, which will mean that they will concentrate on their European Union traffic through Dublin, in my view. That was always the intention of Willie Walsh when he bought Aer Lingus. A lot of people thought he bought it because he was a former chief executive. No, he saw the opportunity, of the uncongested airspace at Dublin, and to grow either to grows Madrid or Dublin. Dublin is an hour's flying time, but most of us hinterland in the UK, so it makes sense. 45 minutes from Heathrow. So yes, there's huge opportunities in Brexit because the freedom rights are not the issue, and there's huge opportunities also for the congested airspace of Europe for us to improve on that.
Good. Thank you, Ulick. Thank you from one of the attendees with your knowledge of industry globally. It's impressive. So thank you, Ulick. Another question coming in with regards to Shannon Airport. So in the context, what do you see as the future for Shannon, and what part can Shannon play in an expansion of Dublin?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, remember now the motorway brings Shannon within 2 hours of Dublin Airport. So yes, I would see Shannon having a huge opportunity here as well, because if Dublin is going to get congested, Shannon is uncongested also. And it has a long runway. It has the infrastructure needed for expansion. Only thing it doesn't have right now is critical mass of flights to the European hinterland. But by making a hub out of Shannon in the longer term, Dublin first, and then probably Shannon, but maybe in parallel you can do both. But I do see Shannon as a huge, it's a huge opportunity for the island of Ireland.
And you see the expansion as connected between Shannon and Dublin? I
do, and maybe a high-speed rail between Shannon and Dublin, which would make it maybe an hour difference, and that would make a huge difference. So Shannon has a huge future, yes. I've worked out of Shannon quite a lot. It's an easy airport to work with. They have loads of infrastructure there. They have everything you need actually to create a hub there, except the critical mass of traffic to the European hinterland. That's what's missing there.
Thanks, Ulick. Brilliant. I think we'll move on to the next part of the session, Ulick. So we can go to the. We've covered China and aviation. Will we go to the European? Do you want to take this topic, or will we go to the European Green Deal?
Yeah, look. Let's look at the rise of China in the aviation sector. I mean, I did touch on the fact that H&A have gone bankrupt, but again, it shouldn't stunt the growth of the Chinese aviation sector. When you look at the population of China, 1.5 billion. Now, the growth per head of population, if you look at what has happened in the United States and in other wealthy countries, as China gets wealthier, you could see their traffic internally just doubling over the next 10 years. I would say China's biggest challenges right now is first of all, how do they expand and maintain their commitment to reducing carbon monoxide gases? How do they do that? Well, again, they're going to have to embrace the technologies that the likes of Zeus are developing for carbon capture. They have the capacity to expand their manufacturing of aircraft. You see Comac now manufacturing small airplanes, but you can see them eventually going to compete with Boeing and Airbus in the larger sector like the 777 and the A350. So China, yes, is a growing economy from an aviation point of view. It will take them 10 years probably to develop an airplane that will be rivaling the Boeing 777 or the A350. But they will get there. I have no doubt about that. As long as they're not distracted by military aggression and incapacity, I have no doubt their economy will grow in the aviation sector, particularly manufacturing sector. Right now, they manufacture many parts for airplanes that are used in Boeing and Airbus, and that will grow exponentially also. So yes, China's economy will grow and they will become a producer of aircraft that will be important in the future, but I think it's 10 years away. Right now, Comac have single aisle airplane, but you could see them, if that's a success, it hasn't been yet because it's not long enough in the market. But if it is, you can see them moving into other sectors quickly. I would comment here that the military manufacturing has grown exponentially in the last number of years. That concerns certainly the West, but hopefully it's just to position them with strength, not to be aggressive in the future. I think that's the declared aim is to be able to be self-sufficient. I think they have memories of the Second World War and the Japanese invasion, etc., and that probably makes them want to be able to protect themselves. No. Anything else on China? Nothing. India. Interesting country, India, from an aviation point of view. The problem for India, as I see it, and I mean, they have huge capability, they have huge interest in expanding their business in aviation. They have a backward enough education system in the lower classes. That's one of the concerns. To get trained engineers in India, you have to take people and train them yourself. You cannot, they do produce certain amounts of good engineers, but to actually get a successful aviation industry, they need more education in mechanical engineering, aviation-related engineering, electronics engineering. Now, they're doing very well in the computer engineering side, but aviation doesn't seem to have grown as the other sectors of the economy have. So I think there's a huge amount of spare capacity there for to grow that sector. Again, like China producing aircraft, I think India are 8 to 10 years away from producing commercial airliners that will rival the existing manufacturers such as Airbus or Boeing. Can they do it? Absolutely. With the population similar to China, they can do it. They do have a democracy, which is one of the useful parts for India. That democracy has its handicaps insofar as a disparate government, they have quite a lot of diversity in their political system, but it's good. And it will mean that they'll get there, but how fast they'll get there may be stultified by the fact they are a democracy, which debates issues too long sometimes, and that's what certainly happens in India with the Indians. They debate everything to the nth degree. But will they be successful? Yes. Education system is improving, and yes, they are a growing power in aviation. I would expect them to rival China within a number of 15 years. That's my prediction.
But before we go on to the European Green Deal, Ulick,
Yeah.
there's aviation manufacturing globally. Has it increased or decreased due to COVID?
You know what? I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that it has decreased because of the number of people that would be affected by COVID. For example, I'm just looking at our own production line where we're building a tanker asset. It's delayed by 6 weeks because of COVID. So yes, it will be affected. Production will be down. I know that it's certainly affected Boeing's production line for the 767 tankers that they're building for the United States Air Force. It's affected also the US Navy's littoral combat ship production, and indeed other retrofits of aircrafts, etc. So yes, it has had an effect on manufacturing. Also, you can see in the papers and the press that chip manufacturers have been down in production because of the intensity of that business. And chips are now becoming scarce, which means the production of computer-driven technologies will be down in the short term also.
Thanks, Ulick.
Having said that, I expect production to improve again next year. You see it back to full capacity plus.
Can I ask another question, Ulick? In the context of the skills and skills deficits, would Ireland have a particular competency in aviation skills and supply of skills to the marketplaces?
Absolutely. Indeed. I mean, we can thank the late Tony Ryan for the great initiatives he took and great leaps forward he took in aviation leasing. I mean, he has probably enriched the GDP of Ireland substantially. I don't know if anyone has quantified it, but it's substantial because he developed the technologies. He was responsible for the Cape Town Convention, trying to persuade nations to get involved, Americans, Brits, and he developed the Cape Town Convention essentially protected leasing companies from nefarious things happening, and it still works today after 20 years. So as a visionary, Ryan was extraordinary. He saw the vision, and he said years ago, he said, it's more important for airlines to own their airports than their airplanes. He was probably right, because the comfort level the airlines can provide at an airport they own. Pan Am used to do it years ago, and then they sold it off when they got into difficulties. But their comfort level at JFK in the Pan Am terminal was way ahead of any other airline at its time. Are we going back to that? I can see it. Yes, I can see this. British Airways, when the travelers experience, they put their first class and business class lounges together, they're extraordinarily luxurious. So they realize that the traveler waiting to board or coming off an airplane, his comfort or her comfort level is important. So yes, I can see that improving all the time.
Thanks, Ulick.
No. Was there any other questions there?
No, that's it. That's it, Ulick.
That's it. Okay. So now we have the European Green Deal to look at. It's very important that we reduce climate change. No matter what happens in the industry, we have to reduce climate change. Otherwise, we won't have an industry to support. So how are we going to do it? We have a number of prongs to the fork, if you like, in the aviation industry. We have more efficient aircraft, more efficient technologies for engines and the way they reduce fuel burn. We also have reduced delays. Like I said earlier on about congestion in European airspace, that is a huge cause of carbon inefficiency. If you're delayed, as I said, for 40 minutes, you're burning 10 tons an hour. That's 100 tons of carbon you're putting into the atmosphere. So delays in congested airspace is a huge issue. Now, how do we fix that? We fix that by, like I said, the hub at Dublin Airport, where it's uncongested airspace. It'll only go so far because once we reach 80 million plus, we're congested airspace in itself. So Shannon, then you look at Shannon, can we do it there and have a connectivity with the short-haul airplanes that burn so little gas, they're 10% of the fuel burn of some of the bigger, So that is a possibility. And I think that's where Shannon has a real opportunity with the European Green Deal, because they can show that the carbon emissions from the heavies coming across the Atlantic or Pacific will be greatly reduced if they could manage an uncongested airspace, and then the short-haul airspace taken. So Shannon and Dublin both have that opportunity as part of the European Green Deal. Now, the European Union is investing in a lot of cutting-edge research for how they can improve. Looking at solar aircraft, I think we're a long way from that. Fuel cells is the other. I think we're not far off fuel cells. I remember looking at fuel cells 30 years ago with Pratt and Whitney, and the young guy who was in their skunk works, as they called it, developing fuel cells for, I said, look, how long will it be before we have these fuel cells able to operate in airplanes? He said, I'll be long retired from Pratt and Whitney when that happens. No, he was younger than I. So I just think that fuel cells, they have come on a lot in recent times because of computer technology and indeed artificial intelligence. So I do think they're coming closer. Can I predict when fuel cells will be available in airplanes? I still think it's 5 to 10 years away. Will it make a change? Absolutely. It'll make a change in the way we do flying, and it'll make a change in the fuel efficiencies, and it'll make a change in the greenhouse gas emissions. Again, I had already touched on carbon capture. That's one of a number of instruments, if you like, to help us produce a greener aviation industry. I mean, the 2030 target is substantial. Reducing it by 55%. It's a huge target. Will we make it? We have to. It's not a question, will we? Can we afford not to? So I think the EU strategy on it will be, if we don't make it, well, they're going to reduce flights into the European hinterland. Again, that's bad for business, and it's bad for, will there be some compensations for using green efficiencies? I think so, yes. I think the incentive to use green has got to be provided by the European Union governments, as indeed looks like the Biden administration is trying to do in the United States. So I think we will take a leaf out of their book, listen to what they have to say, and see what they're doing, and see how we can do this together. How do we involve other nations? The Australians are already doing it. The Japanese are already doing it. China is trying to do it. Yes, they have a long way to go, but they're certainly trying. Russia, a bit of an outlier, I think. They haven't much worried. They don't seem to be engaged as much in the global Green Deal that we're looking for, but I'm sure they will in the end of the day, because it's bad for Russia as well. So they look at the advantages. Somebody on a think tank, a military think tank, said, well, why would Russia bother with climate change? Because they're going to try and get more land in the Antarctic and Arctic. Now, do I think that that's one of their objectives? I don't. I think, it's a byproduct of climate change, yes, that they will get more access to the Black or the northern seas. It could be that they will have trade routes through as the ice breaks. So for them, there's an advantage, yes, but I think the overall cost to them of global warming would be greater than the advantage they get out of being able to sail across their northern territories. They're building air bases in the northern territories as the ice melts, defensive air bases, nothing that you could be worried about. They're going to protect the northern regions. They've already had a substantial amount of airports built in the northern regions, and they're right on the Alaskan coast. Remember, the straits between the United States and between the United States and Alaska is very short. It's only 70 something miles in places, so they're not far away from the United States. Will they go to war with the US? I don't think Putin is that stupid. I think he'll make all kinds of bellicose noises, hacking computers, but I think at the end of the day, he knows when not to go to war. European technologies and American technologies match his. He has some secret weapons, he says. Well, we haven't seen them yet, but we don't know how they perform. There are some intelligence reports that he has a torpedo that can go very much faster and much more stealthy than others. Maybe he has. We don't know. But if he's dumb enough to use it, well, then he risks all out war. I don't think he's that dumb. Now, Who else in Europe is performing well in climate? I mean, the Spanish are doing their best in it, certainly. French. The French have what do you call it? The place in the south of France where they're taking the sun's energy to try and build an energy producing system. I think it's a couple of years away from final. Nobody knows what's going to happen when it does, but all countries contributing to it have the right to the technology they develop. It could be interesting. I suspect the scientists are right that they can produce energy using the technologies of the sun that they're actually advocating. That would be another game changer. Nuclear power. Everyone runs a mile when you say nuclear power. They shouldn't. There are new reactors being developed right now that actually they're called the salt reactors. They actually use spent fuel already from, for example, Sellafield has a huge amount of nuclear waste. We can use that nuclear waste in these salt reactors, and they produce energy very efficiently from the waste of nuclear power stations. And they reduce the half-life of the waste to 50 years versus hundreds of years. So there's a lot of advantage to using those salt reactors. It's a technology that's not fully proven yet, but the technology is there, it's known, and it will work in the end. We have a number of years to go before that works. But the fear of nuclear is making people nervous of anything that says nuclear. But yet, I believe it has and should be studied as a safe way of producing energy in the future. We have a number of ways to go about energy. I mean, you have the wind power, you have wave power, you have nuclear, you have all the various things that are elements in themselves that can contribute to reduction of climate change. 55% in 10 years is possible. I hope it gets there because we can't afford it to fail. The European initiative to make us more fuel efficient, I suppose, it's working, but it's going to take its time. The aviation industry has to contribute its bit by flying more efficient airplanes and by using any methods possible to put the aviation industry into a carbon neutral, at least, if not carbon positive. Of course, part of the European Green Deal, reforestation is very important. We need to start building forests, growing forests to capture carbon. And I think European reforestation has been slow to take off. It's done reasonably well in Ireland, but I think a lot of strategic lands that would need to be used for farming, there's a reluctance to convert them to forests, but I think we may have to look at doing some of that as farmers become more efficient in the future. Yes, we do need trees for sure, but there are lands that are not used for farming that we can grow trees on as well. But I think that's very important. Our bogs here in Ireland have become carbon sinks for us. And as we grow those bogs back now, having stopped peat cutting, we can use the carbon credits from those to get our emissions down. And I think that'll be a substantial contributor to how we do European green in the future. That's about all I have to say on European green. I think it's an essential. It's absolutely essential. And I think we cannot afford to fail to reduce our carbon emissions, whatever it takes. Any questions on that one?
Yes, Ulick, I have two questions in. Have you seen biofuels as part of the solution is one? And also, do you see a role for supersonic aircraft in reducing congestion with Ireland as a potential hub?
Yeah, supersonic, yes. But I think you're looking at hypersonic and you're using a space. I mean, you think about going from Dublin to Australia in 1.5 hours, well, then we're in space travel. That's coming, but it's 30 years away. Right now, I mean, you see Virgin Galactic and all these guys going up into space. Only a matter of time before we launch from Dublin Airport. An hour and a half later, we'll arrive in Sydney, Australia. Yeah. Are they going to be carbon neutral? Absolutely not. The rockets will be burning substantial gas, but there'll be a lot of it burned in space. What effect that has on the overall space issue, I don't know. Space junk is an area that is worrying for any future travel. There's a lot of space junk out there, and an airplane going to Australia could be hit by that space junk and destroyed. creating more junk in space in the process. So there's a lot of risks with the hypersonic between any country, and Australia, for example, I use that as a case in point. But yes, there is a future there. We have to clean up the space junk first, and that's a priority for, I think, for both the European Space Agency and for the United States and China. China has not come on board yet with the, I mean, you saw one of their rockets, the Long March 5, falling to Earth the other day and luckily landed in the Pacific Ocean. We're looking, I suppose, 70% of the Earth is covered by water. So, but it could have landed in the city of New York or in Dubai or Dublin. So this is an area that will have to be controlled by international agreement. The United Nations will play a role in it. Certainly they are addressing it, and the European Space Agency and NASA are addressing it. The issue of creating space junk. Capturing it is hard and costly because it's traveling at 2,500 miles an hour. So you have to equate your, whatever your captured vehicle is, has to get up to the same speed before it captures and slow down. So yeah, it's a tough challenge. Now, what was the next part of that question? Somebody said,
yes, biofuels. Do you see biofuels?
Oh, biofuels. Yeah, biofuels. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I went away from biofuels when I thought of the fact that we're going to use a lot of agricultural land to do it. But I'm not so sure I'm knowledgeable enough about biofuels to contribute much on it. I think any fuel that will reduce carbon emissions is a useful product. Do I know enough about biofuels? I don't. I've been studying other methods of carbon capture and that, and not biofuels. Maybe I should have put more attention into biofuels. So I wouldn't be qualified enough to speak to that subject, but I would say in finishing any product, biofuels or otherwise, that will reduce carbon is something that has to be studied, invested in, and brought forward.
Thanks, Ulick. One more question. Ulick, do you see that Ireland has a particular competency in servicing or achieving or delivering on the aviation for the European Green Deal? Is there a part of us that's particularly apt?
Without any doubt, without any doubt. If you look at the guys that have trained in Aer Lingus and other various airlines, I meet them all over the world, from Australia to the United States, and I use a lot of them myself in our industry in the US. The Irish have a particularly adept, how would I put it? There's a competence about them that you don't have to, you can say, look, would someone get that engine changed? You don't have to go tell them how to do it, and you don't have to, they'll just go do it. I was interested when Germany, about 10 years ago, had huge flooding. The ESB international guys sent a whole load of electricians to Germany to help restore the power because large swaths of Germany were out of power. So this engineer who worked for Vattenfall was telling me in Berlin one time, well, he said, one thing about the Irish, that they came in, they did the job. They didn't come back looking for instructions every hour. He said, the next thing is they had 36 miles of line restored in the space of half a day. We went out and rechecked, everything was perfect. He said, they just carried on with the line. They didn't come back looking for further instructions. He said, they did more than all the engineers put together in half the time. So yes, the Irish have a competency in that, they can do attitude. Let's go do it, guys. Don't hang about debating it, discussing it, talking about it, or making drawing packages out of it. They just go do it. It's an advantage. Sometimes it can be a disadvantage too, to have that gung-ho approach, but certainly it works well for the Irish and in the aviation industry as well. Yeah, we have a lot of competency. Yeah. I mean, most of our designs for we're designing tankers for building, we have done them here in Dublin, and we built them in the United States for a reason of Irish neutrality, which is bunkum anyway, but there you go.
Thank you, Ulick. I know we're coming now to a close in our time. I will hand over to Linda in just one moment to close the session. So thank you, Ulick, for today's presentation, a very generous sharing of your global and local and industry knowledge. A recording of today's presentation will circulate on a link later this week. And I'd like to draw your attention to a series by ICBE in partnership with the Harvard Business Review that's bringing you world-renowned authors. And on the 20th of May, or the 18th of May, we have Lead from the Future with Mark Johnson. So there will be a link there to register, or you can email Maeve at icbe.ie ulick.ie. And I'd like to hand over to Linda to close today's webinar. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Claude, and thank you so much, Ulick. An excellent presentation.
Welcome.
Well, with it had the global overview with key insights, I think, that are going to be really valuable to everyone who probably attended today. And really just to close out and say thank you to everyone for your questions and for your attendance today. And please do keep in touch. And Ulick, thank you so much again.
You're very welcome.
Pleasure.
Very welcome.
Take care.
I enjoyed that.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now. Thank you, Indul.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.